Star Wars was not always a divided fan base. There was a time when fans agreed that the original trilogy was amazing. The Attack of the Clones was arguably the worst movie ever made. The Revenge of the Sith was a masterpiece. But then there was The Phantom Menace. This was the first time the fan base had truly felt division outside of whether you preferred episode 5 or 6, and unfortunately it's still nothing compared to how split fans are today. You either love this movie or you felt it was atrocious. There was no in between. And those that are critical of this movie do have a point. Trade agreements? Jar Jar Binks? No true protagonist? These are all perspectives that bear weight. However, there is an army of Star Wars fans that will die on the hill. That is, The Phantom Menace is a great Star Wars movie. And that's the key. Star Wars movie. Before we can define the specific reasons why The Phantom Menace is an underrated movie, we need to break down what exactly a Star Wars movie is. When we look back at the original trilogy, we have movies that are cohesively amazing and individually memorable. A New Hope was innocent, The Empire Strikes Back was iconic, and The Return of the Jedi was the perfect closure. But when you watch them critically, you see terrible acting, holes in the plot, and questionable storylines. In spite of all that, it's really the world, the universe that is built for us that is so captivating, that pushes us to focus on the experience rather than the details. We remember the existence of the Force and lightsabers over the fact that we just saw a dude make out with his sister. We remember the goosebumps from the musical score rather than the ideological lessons about power and government. We'll remember the introduction and fleshing out of characters we'll cherish forever, rather than the dry line deliveries from average actors. And that is everything The Phantom Menace is. Drink your water. When The Phantom Menace released back in 1999, it was one of the most anticipated movies of all time. See, people growing up right now are coming into a culture where Star Wars is no longer one of the top tier franchises in Hollywood. There was a time that the original trilogy was regarded as some of the most iconic pieces of cinema ever put to film. So when it was announced that a prequel trilogy was being produced, the world went bonkers. It genuinely seemed like Star Wars ads were on every channel, their toys were in every store or fast food restaurant. You really couldn't escape it, and to be honest, you didn't want to. The hype was real. So when it first came out and the critics were absolutely destroying it, that really didn't matter to me. For those first 5 weeks it was in theaters, I used my allowance and my dad and I went and saw it every weekend. I was genuinely in love. And this is where I do understand where people say nostalgia makes this movie seem better than it really is, but you could say that exact same thing about the original trilogy. Sometimes with Star Wars, it really just comes down to which trilogy you grew up with. So let's talk about why 10-year-old Topher fell in love with this movie and why it still holds true today. One of the most impressive aspects of all Star Wars movies is just how immersive all the set pieces, costumes, and environments are. The level of detail these movies provide is something we as fans should really appreciate. In fact, the detail was so specific that I remember owning a book that broke down near every piece of equipment put into these movies. I mean, it was so specific it would talk about the secondary buttons on a radio and what their functions were. Is that level of detail and care going into movies today? I mean, I honestly don't know, but it doesn't really seem like it. Hit that subscription button and turn on notifications. The Phantom Menace does a great job pulling in audiences and setting the table for the rest of the movies. The contrast and the beautiful colors from Naboo to the dreary desert and more black and white feel to the original trilogy is something a lot of people don't talk about. You can just feel that the galaxy and the prequels, this universe, hasn't yet felt the destruction and horror that comes with the reign of the Sith. Obviously, costumes and set pieces are only going to take a movie so far, but what really sets the Phantom Menace apart from the rest of the movies is their casting. When we think of Star Wars movies, we don't really think about them for their acting. In fact, in the original trilogy, I would say Harrison Ford is the best actor out of the entire cast, and yet that really isn't saying much when he's compared to the likes of Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor. Mark Hamill, Carrie Ann Fisher, Harrison Ford, honestly, are not great actors. However, the casting for their roles was spot on. Say what you want about George Lucas and his ability to write a script, but the casting in the original trilogy was spot on. However, the Phantom Menace has a secret weapon, and it's called Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson is a brilliant actor, and he has this ability to ground an entire movie, an ability to bring a certain level of comfort to the audience. And I'm not really sure why people think he isn't the main character. The movie essentially follows him and his point of view. Wherever he goes, the movie goes. When Obi-Wan is left on the ship on Tatooine, we know he isn't the main character. When Anakin is introduced halfway through the movie, we know he isn't the main character, which really just leaves Padme, but the fact that we have no idea who she really is throughout most of the movie means we really don't focus on her at all, which means she's probably not the protagonist. And if we're being honest, what really hurts Qui-Gon's argument as being the main character, the protagonist, it's that he has no arc whatsoever. He is exactly who he is at the end of the movie as he was at the beginning. But does anyone in this movie actually learn or grow, the one person might be Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now for me, Obi-Wan Kenobi is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, whether it was because of Ewan McGregor's acting or his similarities to Captain America, who is my favorite Marvel character. He really felt like the perfect Padawan to play under Qui-Gon Jinn. In fact, this movie had such an impression on me that I started reading the Jedi Apprentice books, which is essentially about the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and how their Padawan master relationship unfolded up until that point. If you know, you know. This is one of the best book series I've ever read. We have to remember that when this movie came out, the only lightsaber fighting we had seen was in the original trilogy, where it was extremely slow, methodical, just not that impressive, but it was really cool at the time. And with it being about 20 years later, audiences were definitely ready for something just better, but we had no idea what was in store for us. I genuinely think it was this scene that made me fall in love with cinematic scores. I can still remember being a 10-year-old kid in that theater when those doors first opened and Darth Maul looked up and then that music came in like bah, ha, ha, ha. The Duel of Fates is by far the best lightsaber fight in the series, and to think that it was done 25 years ago is crazy. But this again is another example of just how awesome Star Wars is at casting. If you know your Star Wars production history, you know just how talented both Ewan McGregor and Ray Park were when it came to lightsaber stunts. Which brings us to one of the biggest missed opportunities there is in Star Wars and Darth Maul. Darth Maul is both one of the most interesting characters ever introduced in these movies, while at the same time being the most underutilized. The way he's introduced, the way he carries himself, there's a lot to like about him. It left us wanting to know a lot more about his background, but the reality is we didn't get that chance because Ewan McGregor cut him in half. I can't express just how much I disagree with their decision to kill Darth Maul. Not only was he just one of the coolest characters we'd ever seen, judging by just how horrible Attack of the Clones was, imagine if we had a side story with Darth Maul where he maybe tried to get revenge against Sidious, tried to wreck their plans, or maybe even have him battling out Dooku to be Sidious's apprentice. Literally anything besides Anakin Skywalker talking about how sand feels. I cannot get over how horrible that scene is. That's not an understatement, and we'll talk about that when we break that movie down. And this is the perfect segue to talk about some areas that really did miss the mark that I really have to admit that I can't deny, because this movie's not perfect. Now the most obvious mistake, the one that everyone points to, is Jar Jar Binks. The gripes about him are definitely warranted, but they're also a little over exaggerated. When you go back and watch the movie, yes, he is absolutely so annoying, but he's really not in the movie as much as you remember. I think it's just that he's so annoying and he's just so distinct in your memory that when you call back the Phantom Menace Star Wars, you just can't help but just think about him because he's just so profuse. He just sticks out like a sore thumb. I still think it would have been a way better decision had they gone with Jar Jar Binks instead of Sidious, Palpatine being behind everything in Episode 9. And then there's the animation of Jar Jar in many aspects of the movie that is a perfect example of how George Lucas leans a little bit too far into CGI. But if we're being honest, Lucas has always had this habit of releasing new edits with his movies having better graphics, and it makes you wonder if these decisions they're made knowing that. He knows that in the future he's just going to release another edit that has the graphics updated. I mean, honestly, if you watch the current Star Wars movie, the latest release versus the originals, Jar Jar and everything else looks so amazing. And then of course there's the relationship between Padme and Anakin in this movie, and no matter which way you break it down, no matter how you look at it, it's awkward. Their relationship in this movie is very much a mother-son dynamic, and I know a lot of women, if they're watching this, are thinking, well, I take care of my husband, my boyfriend, I'm basically their mom. Yes, I get that, but the difference is that you're relatively the same age. And honestly, this could have been easily fixed how they just casted someone a little bit older than Jake Lloyd. Again, I guess there was something about him that they really liked, but it's just weird. But again, this is a perfect example of those weird storylines I mentioned earlier, how in the original trilogy, brother's making out with his sister. Now in this one, we got like an older girl with a younger guy. It's just weird. I mean, oh George, what are you trying to tell us, buddy? And there are a lot of people that do have issue with how much focus there is on politics and the taxation of trade routes, but let's be honest, at the core of the Star Wars saga is government and how society fell from democracy to tyranny. So at some point, you do have to spend time on that subject to build that narrative and how it all started. One line that has stuck with me throughout my entire life, and it's actually like a proverb that I think applies to pretty much any place, anytime, anywhere, and it's when Obi-Wan is with Qui-Gon and Jar Jar, they're in the water in their ship, and Qui-Gon tells us there's always a bigger fish, and that little piece of advice has always stuck with me in life. There's always someone better than you, there's always someone worse than you. The sound effects during the pod racing scene are absolutely ridiculous. That wah 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 sound on the loudspeakers, oh, it feels so good. Way. And then there's the scene with Qui-Gon and Anakin. They're on Tatooine running towards the ship, and Darth Maul is just zooming up behind Anakin, and Qui-Gon says, "Drop Anakin," and bro just drops instantly. I mean, doesn't even ask a question, and that should have been all we needed to know about Anakin. Make that kid a Jedi right away. That dude takes instruction beautifully. Alright, that's a lot of yapping, so what are your thoughts? What did I miss? What did I get right? What did you love about this movie? What did you hate about this movie? Is it better than the other Star Wars movies? Do I make sense when I talk about what a Star Wars movie is? Let me know in the comments, and again, as always, I really appreciate you guys watching these things. These types of videos are so much fun. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click one of these here on the screen. I'm just giving you some time. Bye. Go out there and do something great.